usually in California, but it's kind of 5 here, or 5 minutes into this. So I guess the flow of this this webinar is we're going to have like 5 minutes for a grounding exercise, 5 minutes after that, 5 minutes for brief introductions, and then we're going to break the content out into 2 20-minute sections with a 10-minute Q&A in between. So I guess let's get started with the grounding exercise.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Liz, and I will be guiding you today in this 5-minute meditation prayer. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable, and ground yourself by touching your feet on the floor. In this, I invite you to sit in a comfortable position and take a moment to become present with yourself. Let's take a deep breath. And when you breathe out, let go of all the heavy energy. Take another deep breath. And when you breathe out, tune with the rhythm of the universe, the measure, the movement. Take another deep breath. And when you breathe out, tune in with the energy of today. In the Mexica or Aztec calendar, it is one vulture. Today is a very good day to get rid of what we don't want anymore, because a vulture eats and cleans up what is dead and is no longer needed. Take this moment to ask yourself, what do you want to shed today in order to reach your highest possibilities in life? Maybe it's anxiety, fear, depression, frustration, procrastination, or maybe you're even having trouble sleeping. Let's take a moment to acknowledge these feelings to yourself and where they live in your body. Maybe it lives in your shoulders, in your neck, in your chest, or in your solar plexus. Take a couple of moments to check in with yourself. Let's take another deep breath. And as you breathe out, give yourself permission to let go of what no longer serves you. Breathe in and breathe out, letting go of what's holding you down. Breathe in, breathe out, and release it, and trusting in the process. I invite you to continue to breathe in and out while I take you on this relaxing adventure for a couple of minutes. like to take a moment and thank the indigenous people whose lands that we are on. For example, I live in Oakland, California, and I thank the Ohlone people. And I want to give thanks to our ancestors, Tlazocamati. And I want to give thanks to the elements as well. Tlazocamati, to Father Sky, to the moon, Coyolxauhqui, Tlazocamati, to the sun, Tonantzin, Tlazocamati to Hecat, the wind, Tlazocamati to Tlaloc, the water, Tlazocamati to fire, Tlazocamati to Mother Earth, Tonantzin. May we continue to stand in solidarity during these challenging times and feed our spirit and our soul and stay healthy. I'm going to close by blowing a shell 4 times, each corresponding to the different 4 directions. The east. Tlaxcuatlampa, the place of the light, enlightenment, and where the sun rises, the masculine energy. Now, the west. Cihuatlampa, the place of the feminine energy and the essence of renewal, regeneration, and shedding light. The south. Huichlampa, the essence of discipline, willpower, warriorship, and the youth. And now the north. Mixlampa, the place of the dead, where our ancestors live, place of our dreams and our inner work. Thank you for allowing me to guide you, Tlazocamati. May the energy of the vulture allow us to take us on our path to wisdom. Thank you.
Mateo, thank you so much. And now we'd like to begin with introductions. And we'll start with myself and then we'll go around. My name is Sashi. I'm one of the co-founders of Techqueria and a board member and one of the co-facilitators for tonight.
Hi, my name is Luis Cornejo, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in San Francisco, California, and I'm also the founder of PsychoSocial.
Hi, my name is Katherine Dominguez. I'm an associate clinical social worker, and I work with homeless families here in San Francisco, and I'm the co-founder of PsychoSocial.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Flores. I am an associate marriage and family therapist. I work in a nonprofit organization here in San Francisco, and I work with the Latino community. I'm the networking manager for PsychoSocial, and I also oversee Reclaiming Wellness within PsychoSocial, which is a meetup for mental health professionals of color.
Hi, my name is Liz Hinojosa, and I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I also work at a nonprofit in the community in San Francisco. I work with teachers, students, and families, providing mental health consultation in the schools, particularly in the pre-Ks and infant and toddler rooms. And I am the content manager at school, and part of what I do, managing the content on what you see on the website, and then also looking at the submissions that we get from the people that blog, that are on our blog as well too.
And there's also Cynthia Flores, who's on mute, and is also one of our moderators.
Yeah, hi, Andrea. I'm a board member and one of the chapter directors here in Austin.
So thanks everybody. And I guess before we begin, can I just get a little overview of like what is psychosocial?
Yes. Okay, so PsychoSocial started about 2.5 years ago, and it was really basically it was born out of the idea of wanting to spread mental health awareness through a more, you know, a less, I guess not serious, but a more digestible manner, in a way where people could read about mental health, but also feel that they're getting something from it and not just worry about, you know, mental health in general. So we were really trying to create a space where people could go and read articles that were being written by mental health professionals on different topics, from relationships to culture to mindfulness to depression, anxiety. And from there, it grew into more multimedia. So we use a lot of social media, YouTube. We're currently working on a podcast. We have articles, like I said, submitted by different therapists. We currently have about 12 contributors to the blog. And you know, we put resources on there. And so it's really a platform that we've been working on for the last 2.5 years. And now it's grown with Cynthia coming on board this past year. She's led our community outreach and also our meetups for mental health professionals of color. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about that as well. But PsychoSocial is really a platform that's dedicated to bringing awareness about mental health. And we partner with a lot of amazing people who are also doing similar work. And yeah, I mean, you know, we also provide consultation for people who are doing projects or who are also creating their own organizations, you know, and want to include mental health. I don't know if you want to share a little bit, Cynthia, about Reclaiming Wellness, a little more detail.
Yeah. So Reclaiming Wellness is a meetup for mental health professionals of color. We actually started that last year in September. It started mainly for Latinx professionals of color, and then we realized that we are already such a very small community within the San Francisco Bay Area, so we wanted to open up to, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, and really wanted to be inclusive, because we realize that we exist, right? We exist in our communities, but yet it's really challenging to find each other and to find community and to support each other. So I think the whole purpose of Reclaiming Wellness is for us to, as mental health professionals, to get together, have fun, find ways to support each other, and also heal, right? To find ways that we can heal ourselves and support each other and build community. So that's something that we started here in San Francisco Bay Area, and we're really excited to have to know that we are a big community. It's really hard to, with the work that we're doing, to kind of get together. And doing this monthly meetup really allows us to socialize, to network, and to resource with other folks that are doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for doing that. And I love how you're reclaiming it, especially with the introduction. I was able to feel a lot of the sort of like indigenous cultural roots that often get suppressed in our society. And I think especially your angle about focusing on Latinx in the workforce, professionals, like that's very much what our community is about. And so I think with that, you know, I want to get into sort of like the main, you know, topic for the evening, which is like balancing work life. We're now obviously in a crisis. Everybody knows that. But we're now in a place where like working from home is very important, and we're facing a lot of issues that some of our more privileged colleagues don't necessarily face. So I wanted to hear more about like what can we be doing? What are the issues that like arise from that?
Yeah, and you know, I think I want to start off by just validating everyone that's, you know, joining us, and also everyone out there, because the reality is that anxiety and, you know, worry is a normal response to what's going on. We are going through a very extraordinary situation right now that's forced, you know, not just a lot of people to have to work from home, but also put a lot of people at risk and in danger because we're not prepared. And so it is very normal for people to feel worried and also to have anxiety. You know, and I want to validate that because I think a lot of times we try to, you know, we try to either go to one extreme, which is completely worry and close off and, you know, have all these other things that come up like trouble sleeping, not being able to concentrate, or we have this other part of like minimizing and being you know, in a place where we don't want to accept that something is happening. And so I think it's just really important that whatever people are feeling, to just validate that we are going through something that is very unprecedented for most of us. And so it's going to bring out a lot of worry and anxiety. And with that said, you know, also just starting off with letting people know that even though we don't have control over everything that's happening right now, you know, what's impacting us, that we do have a certain level of control. And so, you know, for the topic today, talking about setting boundaries between work and home, that's something that we have control over, right? That's something that we can start to do. It might not be as easy for everyone. Of course, we all come with very different situations, very different expectations from our roles at work, but we are able to, you know, start to set boundaries, start to take care of ourselves, start to follow recommendations, you know, from just in terms of like being safe and social distancing. And we can definitely go into that a lot more, but there is that opportunity for us to have that control in this situation. So I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything about that. Well,
Can you go into more of some of the details of those things, like, you know, what are ways that you can like set limits and boundaries, and dealing with like media consumption, the effect it has on that?
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know, so I think one of the big things with having to work from home right now is that it is something that is forced for many of us, right? We didn't really, it wasn't so much of a choice or a privilege that we got. It's actually, it's meant to help us minimize exposure to ourselves and to others. So in that sense, it's also something that we can't control, right? We have, a lot of us have to work from home. And so part of that is also, you know, it is just coming to an understanding of what that means, right? Because when we're at work, there's obviously a specific structure and something that we follow. Whereas at home, a lot of us come with different situations. Like we might have a lot of roommates, we might have situations where we live with family, where we live alone and don't have access to other people. So it's really important for us to also, you know, independently think about our own situation. You know, and we're gonna definitely talk about some tips and some things that people can do in terms of setting limits and boundaries while they're working at home. But it's gonna be very unique for each individual. So I definitely recommend that while you're listening to us talk, to also think about a few things that you know, are impacting you right now while working at home. And they might be very different for different people. You know, and the first thing I would say when working from home is definitely creating a dedicated workspace. I know that when we're at work, we have a space most of the time. You know, we have a desk or we're working at a station. And so at home, it can be very difficult to do that sometimes. And I'm guilty of this too. I know a lot of people might be working in bed, right? They might be sitting in their bed and on the computer, on the phone. And I definitely want to recommend that you don't do that. You know, your bed is a space for you to relax, for you to be comfortable, you know, for you to have this sacred space. And so I think creating a dedicated place for you to work at, you know, if you do have like a kitchen, or if you have a living room and you're able to set up something where you actually have to move and get out of bed, that's a big one. And I say that because a lot of times, you know, when we're in bed, we don't always feel motivated. We start to kind of fall into this pattern because we're out of our routine. And so that can also start to impact our mood and our mental health. So definitely try to find some normalcy in that, finding a space where you can work. Another one too, you know, in terms of setting boundaries, is also setting your hours. And that's part of self-care. You know, if you're working 9 to 5, that's your work schedule. I know from my experience working with a lot of people who are working from home right now, and being a therapist, I've heard people tell me that they're working 14 hours. They're working way longer than they usually do at work, and they're starting to feel anxious and depressed. And and the reason is, I have nothing else to do, right? I'm bored at home. And my recommendation with that is just to really respect your boundaries with yourself in terms of your work hours. What is your schedule? And then after that, finding something to do for yourself, something that you enjoy, and practicing self-care as well. That means taking your lunch breaks. That means being able to give yourself some time to do whatever you have to do. If it's to call a family member, if it's to call a friend, do that. You deserve to have your breaks as well. And that's easier said than done. I know sometimes we get so carried away, and especially for people working in the tech industry. I know that busy is a big distraction. People tend to be busy all the time. They're busy in meetings, they're busy in work, they're busy, going to a presentation, constantly doing something, and we don't take time to really step back. And so right now, because of what's happening, a lot of us are kind of froze up in that. It's like, okay, what do I do with myself now? I'm not busy all the time. And so part of self-care right now is also allowing ourselves to start to get reacquainted with ourselves, not just mentally, but also spiritually. And I say that in whatever your beliefs are, just be reacquainted with yourself, your feelings, your emotions, your own space in the world. So yeah, taking your breaks, and like I said, taking care of yourself physically means nurturing yourself. Go to the bathroom if you have to go. Don't sit there trying to finish, to the last thing just because you have you have to finish and things like that.
And also, like, going with what Luis was saying, is finding creative ways to connect with people. I know a lot of what they've been talking about with the language has been like social distancing, and they've been saying that a lot. But I know what they're trying to do now is change the language to physical distancing, because a lot of people are isolating themselves, and that can create a really lonely space. And even with my friends, like, we've been finding ways to play like games like over Zoom, or using FaceTime and all the technology that we have to be able to really connect with people, because we're not sure how long this is going to last, and like we need people like that to support us and walk us through and be available to process with us what's going on.
Exactly. And I also think that technology gets a lot of bad rep, usually, and now it's really turned to this point where it's actually great. We can connect. The difference between this and other natural disasters is that, we still have the internet, we still have resources that we need. Our water is still running. I know that when we think of natural disasters, sometimes we think about big things like earthquakes, or fires, or things that are very devastating, and those things themselves are very traumatic. Right now with this natural disaster, it's a little scary because it's more of something invisible that we can't see. So of course there's that anxiety, but and that's the whole aspect of physical distancing, right? Taking care of ourselves physically, because we can't see what is happening. And so I think, like Kat brought up, it doesn't mean that we need to isolate, right? It still means that we can connect and find those creative ways. Bring out, that old webcam that you haven't used if you don't have one on your computer, or even texting people or planning things. I know I asked, for example, my brother to send me videos of my niece, and that's something that, we'll chat that way, or I'll call, or just do things to stay connected. Not all of us have family that are close by. Not all of us have, not all of us are from the area, or some of us move to different areas, so it's nice to be able to connect with people too, and still feel like there's that opportunity. And going back to normalcy too is really keeping those routines. So another thing is getting ready in the morning. Like, don't assume because you're not going to work that, you don't have to take care of yourself or get ready. It's the same thing. If you go into that routine of getting up, even at the same time, getting ready, feeling like you're going in with an intention and a purpose, it makes a big difference than getting up and feeling like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to take time to do that. And then it just feels like we're not really going through that process of getting ready to do something for the day. So it's mentally buying into that as well. It's like, how do I prepare myself mentally for what I have to do today? For me, it's like, I need to shower. If I don't shower in the morning, I feel like my day doesn't start. So it's even that little thing. It's like, I still wake up every day at 7 and get ready, and I'm working from home, and dress up. And then I come to like a specific workstation, and that's how I start my day. I might get some coffee or eat something small. But I start my day the same way if I was going to work. And that for me has helped me get into that mentality every day. And that includes work rituals, right? What are your work rituals that you were doing at work? Was it getting coffee? Did you have like a special mug? Did you have like a special snack that you had in the morning? Did you, put music on and get ready and do your makeup? Like, what were those things that you were doing in the morning that you could keep doing now to help you, feel motivated and continue to feel like you're going into your day with an intention?
Yeah. And
I
also
think
too, along with,
I think that's a really good.
Go ahead, Liz.
I was thinking about what our rituals are, and for example, like setting your alarm clock, taking a shower or eating breakfast. Like, really think deeply about what your daily rituals are, because you are doing that every single day. And then I also think like writing down what your schedule is going to be for the day, right? And then like really, putting your lunchtime, your breaks, and really sticking true to that. Maybe you want to have a buddy where you guys could keep each other accountable for that as well too. And as far as like taking a shower in the morning and eating, for me also is like getting into my PJs. Like, I don't put on my work clothes, but I do put something on comfortably. Sometimes I'll do my makeup because I like to do that. But also like, trying not to be in your PJs all day unless it's like a weekend, like coming out of your PJs, you're like, okay, now I can relax and now I can put work behind, that's one of those rituals I also think about too.
Yeah, when I think about rituals too, I think about transitions, right? So if you're transitioning from your bed, so like you're even within your routine and your daily schedule, right? You come into your computer, or you look at your schedule or your routine for the day or your agenda. So you're wanting to also integrate transitions throughout the day. So transitioning from your workstation, whatever it is, wherever it is, to a lunch area, to an area where you're going to eat lunch. So preferably not eating in front of your laptop, or, just wanting to have a mindful eating experience where you eat mindfully, where you just like eat somewhere else, either in your kitchen area, or just find another area where you can eat. So doing that, and also transitioning from one activity to the next. So for instance, from your workstation to when you're finishing up, when it's time for you to wrap up, right? So how do you create your little rituals in between, like either a movement break or a stretch or some yoga, right? Before you transition to doing something else, right? So I think kind of thinking about those things is helpful, and integrating transitions, right? From one place to the other, from one activity to the next. I think that can also help reduce sort of just worry and anxiety, and also just like kind of set those limits and boundaries working from home, right? Because it's not just also it's not just work home, it's also creating spaces and time within your schedule to do pleasurable things, right? Things that you enjoy. I know right now we can't really go out or, go to the gym or be physically active, but how do we find creative ways to engage our body and do body movement? Because not doing body movement can definitely impact our sleep and our sleep hygiene, right? So we need to constantly be in some movement. So even if you have to put a YouTube video or, do some stretching, so that way you can get some body movement, then that can actually help you so much in your sleep hygiene and with just de-stressing and decompressing.
Yeah. Kind of going with what Cynthia was saying, like after you establish a schedule, like be aware of how much you're taking in. Because when you say you're going to stop, but then like, are you looking at your work email, or are you checking your voicemail, or looking at missed calls? Just being aware. And then also, like, are you on Facebook? Like, how much of the news are you taking in, and how much are you processing of that? And sometimes when you're on Facebook and you're scrolling through, or Instagram, you're not really aware of how much of the news that you're taking in, and just being mindful of that as well.
All right, thanks everybody for all this like amazing information. I think now we want to move into doing some Q&A. Andrea, are you there?
Yeah. If no, I'm not saying any questions yet, but something I have seen a lot in the mental health channel and just sort of generally on the Slack is that some people are having trouble sleeping. And we've had a number of members either lose their job completely, or people whose hours are being cut dramatically. And so can you sort of speak to that, like how people are supposed to deal with the unknown and just sort of living in that space?
Louise, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I'll start with sleep, because I heard you mention sleep, and I know that that's something that's very common for people who are experiencing anxiety. So so it's important to think about anxiety as a very natural response, right, that our body has, and it's not just mental; it's also physical. Anxiety helps protect us. It keeps us safe. It tells us when there's danger, and so it is energy that's in our body, right? And so, like Cynthia was speaking earlier about doing physical activity, right? That really goes into anxiety as well. That a lot of times when we're holding anxiety in our body, we're carrying this tension and this energy that's there. And so a lot of times when we're thinking about sleep, it's hard because that's the time where we have to actually sit without a distraction. There's no phone, there's no computer, there's no people talking to us. So it can be really, really hard to sit with ourselves, because that's when the thoughts start to come in. So we start to think about everything that we were avoiding the whole day, or more in detail, and we kind of go into a rabbit hole. So part of sleep is really important to talk about sleep hygiene. And what sleep hygiene is it's basically the routines that we carry when we are trying to go to sleep. Like, what do we do once we're starting to unwind? And so that's part of the same thing with setting boundaries. Are we working to that last minute before we go to sleep? Because that's going to lead us to, not having enough time to really process the day, or really go through the motions that we've been, the reality of what's happening. So, it's really important for people to set a schedule. Like, what time do you want to go to sleep? Like, if my goal is to say, I'm going to go to sleep at 9 every day so I can wake up at 6, then, or 10, let's say 10, more realistic, I don't sleep at 9, but you're going to go to sleep at 10 p.m., then making sure that you're very strict with your routine, and making sure that you give yourself at least an hour to an hour and a half, preferably 2 before that, to start to unwind. And what that means is, starting to get ready, getting into comfortable clothing, getting into the mentality that, I'm going to relax now, and I'm going to be going to sleep. For some people, that can include a whole ritual, right, of taking jewelry off, makeup, or changing clothes, or putting on something warm, or even watching a little TV, right, which is fine. An hour before you are getting ready to sleep, that's when things start to wind down, and that's where you really should be engaging in things that are not requiring so much of your mental energy. Things like, reading a book, writing in a journal, writing down things that, you want to do for the next day of plan, or, practicing gratitude, writing things down that you're grateful for that happened during the day. Little things like that, are not going to overstimulate your mind. And then, giving yourself also time to practice mindfulness, being able to deep breathe, being able to sit with yourself, and treating your bed. And this is why I brought up the whole not eating in bed, not doing work in bed, because your bed should really be a place for relaxation. It's not a multi-purpose space. You know, it's not meant for you to sit there and eat and also do work. It's really for relaxing. And if you don't train your brain to see it that way, then you're going to see this as a space where you can do a lot of things. And it kind of defeats the purpose of relaxing. So definitely treating that as a sacred space where you're going to relax, where you're going to close your eyes, you know, avoiding things like caffeine, alcohol, things like that you don't want to be drinking like an hour before bed, because it is gonna activate your body in different ways.
So there was a recent question about from one of the panelists: how do you deal with the conflict between wanting to be close to family and having to stay away to keep them from being exposed?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Like, because a lot of us, you know, like, relationships are the foundation of, you know, ourselves. And for me, I know I've been calling my mom like almost every day. And I know that, you know, I can't be with her because she's older and I'm afraid like for her health, but just finding other ways to maintain that relationship and that communication.
Another question that came up. My dietary needs aren't compatible with home cooking anymore. How do I be firm without hurting anyone's feelings?
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
you know, I think what's important to remember, and this isn't easy for everyone, we tend to want to please other people or feel like we're hurting people's feelings. But if this has to do with your dietary needs, it's not about hurting someone or insulting someone. It's really about you advocating and speaking up for what you need, right? And so we can't control the way other people feel, but at the same time, you know, if your intention is to do it because it's something that you need, I think that that's important to put it in that perspective, right? Not in the perspective of I'm doing this to hurt someone's feelings or this intention, but really because I need to take care of myself. And there's certain things that I need for my body to be okay, for my mind to be okay, for me to consume. And I think that, you know, a lot of times when we're talking about setting limits with people, there's a lot of shame. A lot of shame because we feel guilty, right? We're told don't hurt other people's feelings. But the truth is that it's really not about hurting people's feelings. It's about getting your need met. So I'm going to say that, you know, when you do it, obviously think about ways that you can express that, you know, in an assertive way where it's not aggressive and it's also not passive, but you're expressing that this is a need.
Yeah.
You know, most of the time people understand, and we kind of just psych ourselves out because we think people are going to reject us or push us away or take it as, you know, see us as unappreciative.
Yeah. And there's also other ways to like share space. You know, you might not be able to eat the same foods that other people are eating, but maybe you can share a meal time or have specific items and maybe modify some other items so that you're able to still maintain, you know, that meal time with individuals that are in your family or your roommates.
I do want to answer the question of, I think Andrea asked about like people losing their jobs, right? Job insecurity. And I want to take some time to respond to that question real quick. Just, you know, that when people start losing their jobs, especially now, given the crisis, the health crisis situation, and, you know, people find out that they have lost their job or they're laying off people, right? I think it's important that, you know, first and foremost, if that ever happens, just wanting to take time to process, right, your feelings, process that grief and loss that a lot of people are experiencing collectively. A lot of people in our community right now are not working, right? So they're having to, you know, stay at home with their children and not knowing what's going to happen next day, right? In terms of food and rent and all of that. So it's definitely very alarming and it's very anxiety provoking what's happening, but just you know, wanting to take the time to process your feelings instead of, you know, just sit with them and validate their experiences and acknowledge them, reach out for support, right? Reach out to your natural support and, you know, just try to create a plan, right? Focus on what, I know it can be very overwhelming, but focus on what is it that you can control? Like, what is it that it's in your control, right? Try to, you know, communicate with HR and figure out ways to negotiate, right? If you need to look into a severance package in terms of like, what is it that you can, that the employer can provide you, whether, you know, you can negotiate severance, right? How many months they can, you know, pay you for, either 2 or 3 months, depending, you know, and also stating to them what your value is and what you have brought to the company or the organization. Make sure that you also, you know, you negotiate healthcare and figure out how much the company, you know, can cover in terms of the benefits and how long. And also try to do a little bit of research, right? In terms of like, are you eligible for unemployment? And just go from there, but just try to focus on the things that you can control. And I know it can be very anxiety provoking, but just take it a day at a time. And like I said, be compassionate with yourself and reach out for support as much as you can for your loved ones. And then, you know, you're not alone. And a lot of people are really experiencing a loss right now.
Yeah. I want to kind of ask one more quick question, and then we'll get back to the more discussion part of this, which is it follows along to what you were saying about you know, talking to HR or your manager or company. There's one question, I'm going to paraphrase, but they're saying they have a lot of issues at home that makes it hard for them to focus on their work. They feel helpless, and they're worrying that they're falling behind at work and are not sure how to talk to their manager about this situation.
So that they're worried that they don't know how to communicate, like maybe what's happening with them internally.
Yeah, what I'm reading from the question is that they there's like maybe some fear of bringing it up to the manager, like a fear of asking for help.
Right. I mean, that can definitely be very anxiety provoking, right? Just, I think it also really depends on the work culture, right? How much we feel, or do we feel supported by our managers? Do we feel supported by our teams? If we don't, is there a particular person that we can reach out within the organization that can guide us and guide you and support you in the process of talking to them about how you're feeling, right? So, I mean, this is about advocating, really checking in with yourself and figuring out how to advocate for yourself if you're experiencing anxiety, depression, right? These are all things that, you know, at some point we all experience, and it's important that we advocate for ourselves. And these are things that, you know, that there should be guidelines and things within the organization that support our mental health and our well-being, right? So that's something that I wanted to add. I don't know if anybody else wants to add regarding that.
I was also going to add that it could be valuable to talk with your HR manager, because sometimes, you know, they're able to modify your work schedule and modify your workload and come up with a plan that works for the organization or your employer as well. But also being aware of employee assistant like services, like EAP. Sometimes they have like mental health services or webinars or information that could be helpful.
Yeah, and I think, you know, too, when we're talking about mental health, there's still a lot of stigma out there about asking for help and being transparent about how we're feeling. And the truth is, you know, that there has been a huge movement, and there is a bigger understanding of mental health. I'm not going to say that it's perfect in any way, but that, you know, it is important for us to be able to advocate for ourselves, especially when it comes to mental health. and it's, you know, I want to say part of talking to your manager is also having that internal dialogue with yourself. You know, what is it about having this conversation? How is it different from you breaking your leg, you know, and asking for accommodations because you physically hurt yourself versus, you know, you're mentally strained and you're having a hard time being able to focus, right? Like there's a lot of stigma there between those two things when we're talking about physical health and mental health. And I think that if it's something that you're feeling that's keeping you from being able to concentrate, that's causing you, you know, a lot of personal and emotional issues, that it's very valid and that you should feel safe being able to have those conversations. And, you know, and even if they don't respond in a way that you're hoping or expecting, you know, for you to be able to share that and say that you do have a need, you know, you're advocating for yourself. And that also gives you the opportunity of saying that, you know, you asked for help when you needed it. You know, there's a lot of managers out there, a lot of people who sometimes don't understand, but part of advocating for yourself is shifting the focus to, you know, you expressing your needs and knowing that you are asking for help. And that makes a big difference, you know, when we go through that process. If later on you do have an issue, you can say that you did ask for help, that you had shared about your experience, versus you never said anything because you know, you were too worried about the reaction, when they're supposed to be there to help you. And they're supposed to be there to make sure that, you know, you're well to do your role, and that includes mental health.
Mhm.
So on that topic, there's a question that says, especially being Latinx, it's like asking for help is hard for a lot of us. So do you have some tips on how to ask for help?
Yeah, you know, being Latinx, for sure, there's a lot of stigma, like I said, in the community, and specifically when we're talking about the Latinx community, right? There's still a misunderstanding of what mental health is. I know even for me, when I call people to talk about mental health services at my job, most of my Latina clients, you know, who are older, the first thing they'll say to me is, "Yo no estoy loca, I'm not crazy." And I have to go through this process of really explaining to them, you know, what it means when we're talking about mental health. So it's really about us having an understanding of what mental health is, and understanding that it's also okay to, you know, that we're going to go through difficult situations, and that the only way for us to move forward is to be okay with having those conversations and not avoiding them. You know, being able to share with people. I think a lot of times we kind of jump to worst case scenario and make a lot of assumptions and fortune telling about what we think people are going to say or how they're going to respond. You know, and even with family, I know my family, for example, it took them a really long time to understand what mental health was. And it wasn't until I became a therapist and I spoke with them, and, you know, ongoing, like the last 6 years, that now they understand why it's so important. And even they've done little things, you know, to shift that. And so, like I said, we can't control the way people respond. But if no one is having the conversations, then we're never going to start making a shift in those dynamics, right? Mental health, and it's also seen in very different ways, you know, even culturally. Like, it's not like mental health, when we're talking about Western, like therapy and like kind of talking, is not always the same thing in our communities. You know, we talk a lot about cultural healing practices in psychosocial, you know, things that people do that are not therapy, because therapy is not the only option, right, for mental health. So even talking to people, giving them space to be able to sit, have a cafecito, or going for a walk and just checking in, like, how are you feeling, without having to put labels on it. Because I think that's what scares people a lot too, is like, oh, like, how are you doing? You know, how's your mental health? And sometimes people might feel like, oh, like, it might be triggering. So I think even just doing it in a sense of like, you know, I've been feeling a little down, I've been a little worried about everything that's going on, and trying to have those check-ins. I think normalizing mental health is really helpful, but we need to have those talks and those conversations.
So what are some like underlying cultural issues that might, you know, be contributing to this? Like, I know there's issues of like colonialism and historical trauma and things like that. Like,
yeah, Liz, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that for me as a woman of color, my family, they immigrated from Mexico. I'm the first generation born in this country. And it's really, as a woman of color, I've learned to ask for help. It's not easy. Maybe it's part of colonization, you know, possibly, and you really have to know your own internal process. So that takes time to reflect and to really be like, why am I feeling this way? Why is it hard for me? You know, it might be different for people, but I'm sure there's also that underlying thread as well too. And then when asking for help, it's like, okay, I need support, but I don't know how to ask for it, or I don't know what it is that I need. You know, so when you're asking for support, you have to have concrete ways of what it is that your family, your friends can support you with. I know I have a really good friend of mine, also Latinx, and having a hard time to ask for support. And what she does sometimes is send an email to all of her, friends, and asking, this is what I'm going through right now, and can you please help support me? And she'll lay it down. She'll be very concrete about that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Liz. I think in my own experience as a woman of color, and also experiencing internalized oppression and internalized racism and all of these isms, I think and in my own healing journey, I think this has been a huge part of my own healing journey, being able to, acknowledge and that, I've gone through all of this historical colonial trauma, internalized trauma, and intergenerational trauma, right? And I think being able to acknowledge and validate those experiences first and foremost, and also just being able to be courageous and brave, and like Liz is saying, like being able to figure out what's happening internally. Like I feel like before I used to like internalize, work dynamics, and I was just like, why am I not being why am I not being listened to? Why am I not my investment and my time not taken seriously? And I was like, that's not me. That's not on me. That's the whole dynamic that is happening, that is being played out as, institutional oppression, institutional and systemic issues, right? And my own internal like dialogue is figuring out what is it that how is it impacting me, and what is it that I can do that is in my control to do, right? And yes, it's still hard for me to ask and what I need for what I want, but I think it's just being brave and getting out of our comfort zone and knowing intuitively and that we are worthy of respect, that we are worthy of abundance and of the opportunities that we have, right? That we belong where we are, and and I think it's important that when we come from this historical and institutional and colonial trauma, all of these things have been internalized, right, within us. And the reality is like, it takes time, it takes a lot of self-compassion and kindness to recognize and be like, I deserve better, and I am worthy of everything that I worked for, right? And I think it takes a long time to get to that point, but it just takes self-compassion and taking it a day at a time. Yeah.
Something we also see sometimes in Techqueria is people who feel some shame over their success because they have like an immigrant background or come from unprivileged backgrounds in general. And now we're in these spaces where you're like surrounded by, the elite of the elite, and then you come home and now you feel like it's hard to relate.
Yeah, and something that Cynthia said that was great, this is a journey. It's a very individual journey, right, that we go through. It's very common for people to experience imposter syndrome at one point or another, right? We we start to feel that we're not worthy, that we might not deserve to be in the spaces that we are. And that goes back to, you know, the same thing that Cynthia was talking about, historical trauma, you know, the things that we heard from our parents who maybe also felt the same way. I know for me, growing up with my parents, you know, I was constantly told, you're not American. You know, we're not from here. Like, people are not going to treat us the same. And it was this worry about wanting to fit in, but also feeling like I didn't belong because they felt that way because they were mistreated, and their trauma transferred onto me. And so it was a journey of really rediscovering, you know, that the opportunities that I received from them, you know, that I took advantage of those, that I was able to get to a point where, you know, now I'm working as a therapist and being able to validate those things, right? We need to be able to do that for ourselves. Like, how do we validate and honor our own journey, and also understanding where, you know, that comes from those feelings, because there is a lot of re-traumatization. There's a lot of historical trauma. There's a lot of discrimination and racism that has happened for a lot of us, and maybe not directly with us. And I mean, at the same time, we all deal with microaggressions, but for our parents, right? Like, our background historically, like understanding that, you know, that we deserve to take space, that we, you know, work for these positions, for these spaces. And like Cynthia was saying, that is a journey. It requires a lot of empathy. It requires a lot of compassion for ourselves. And it's also something that, you know, we need to continuously practice, right? I always talk about creating positive affirmations. And actually for PsychoSocial, we have a campaign called Love Yourself. And we basically asked people from different walks of life. We even had Michael Urbina, who was on one of the panels for Techqueria here in San Francisco, and Chad, who was also part of that panel, you know, to talk about like what motivates them. How do we speak to ourselves to help us remember and remind ourselves of, you know, the knowledge and the power that we hold. Right. And it's all about internal dialogue. If we continuously tell ourselves that we don't deserve it, or that we're not good enough, we're going to believe it, and we're going to act that way. And we might feel disconnected, avoid interactions, avoid people, avoid opportunities. So it's really about shifting that internal dialogue to telling ourselves, hey, I'm here. There's a reason, you know, I've worked really hard. I've done what I have to do, you know, and really appreciating and putting value to our own journey, right? Like what we had to go through. Like, I know for a lot of people of color, you know, it's hard, it's a struggle, right? We need to go through so many hoops and jump through so many, like, just like all these different obstacles to get to where we are. And a lot of times we don't take time to really recognize that and value ourselves for that. You know, because we think because everyone, you know, we're in a space where we have maybe more white coworkers or people with privilege, and they were able to do it, that we kind of devalue ourselves. But it's also understanding that we have to go through our own journey, and it's not the same. And so just validating that and appreciating ourselves.
Thank you, Luis. I also wanted to add, speaking about shame, I was raised Catholic, so I know a lot about shame. And, you know, sometimes you really have to sit with yourself, and it's like, maybe the shame, maybe all of that shame is not yours. Maybe some of it's your family's, your parents' shame, you know, and sometimes we carry emotions or feelings that are not necessarily ours, or because, you know, our family or, you know, had told us about that. And shame, anxiety, they're all feelings, right? And it can be very intense at times. And sometimes you just got to sit with that discomfort for a while, you know, and acknowledge it and let it know that it's there. It's almost like its own entity, if you want to treat it in that way, and then let it go, you know. And breathing, maybe connecting. I mean, I know we can't really go outside. Maybe if you have a garden, or, you know, just like, how do you reconnect with yourself? How do you reconnect with your spirit? You know, is one of those questions, and know that, you know, it's just a feeling, and that will pass.
I was also thinking about, you know, how like assimilation, it was pretty much, we experienced colonial trauma, right? And that we had to assimilate into the white dominant culture. And I think similarly is happening in a different dynamic right now, being in very privileged, you know, white dominant culture or work environment, right, and tech, right, and even in mental health, like we're like unicorns, right, almost like, you know, poquitos, somos poquitos, you know, and I think kind of navigating different systems, it can be so overwhelming. It can be challenging. It can like, you know, defy our different intersectionalities of who we are. And I think, yeah, and I think that can be very, very challenging. But I think also, like what Liz was saying, being able to stay rooted and grounded in, you know, our spirit. And I know we all come from different backgrounds, right? But I think spiritual wellness, whatever it is that you believe in, I think that's also such an essential part of our mental health and our physical health, right? Just trying to keep that balance, but also just wanting to bring up the fact that you know, all of these components are important, and also how do we think of this as a collective, right?
Mhm.
So yeah.
Thanks for sharing. I wanted to do a time check. We're 7 minutes past our end time, but I can stay a lot longer. So as long as y'all here, we can keep going.
There's a question around how has this health crisis shifted or changed the way that we deliver services? So there was a question around that.
Yeah. That's the question. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I think I could talk a little bit about that too. You know, with the changes, of course, even for us as mental health professionals, we also have to make adjustments, right? And therapy, it's interesting because for me personally, and this is just my own thing, is I enjoy the face-to-face, right, interactions. I think that it brings about a very, very special dynamic. But at the same time, you know, people have things to do. People don't always have an opportunity to go to a location for an hour. And so this is something that has been happening in therapy, and something that we're utilizing more now. And it's great because this is pretty much the type of situation, you know, that we've been waiting for in terms of using teletherapy, which is very new. There's still a lot of guidelines and stuff that, you know, you can't do therapy, for example, like a therapist in California can't provide therapy to someone in Texas and stuff like that. So there are limits to it, but, you know, the important thing is really being able to have access to space, right? To being able to communicate with someone. So, you know, many of us have gone online. You know, we're providing therapy through video platforms, through the phone, and still being able to manage, you know, supporting people through that. And I also want to mention, because I read some pieces, we do partner with some amazing people like Latinx Therapy and Therapy for Latinx. They're both amazing platforms where you can find therapists, and a lot of their therapists right now are offering you know, web-based services at a reduced cost, or some of them are actually offering pro bono or free services, or even support groups that are non-therapy based, but they're there for people to be able to talk about what's going on. So there are resources out there. You can always visit our website too, at psychosocial.media, to look those places up. You know, and the great thing of
sorry, just one thing about a mental health access. If you are with an organization and they provide healthcare, right, and normally they would also provide access to mental health services. So looking into your insurance, what insurance you have, and checking in with HR and calling the insurance and figuring out whether they cover mental health services, which normally they do, and that's a way that you can also access mental health services.
Yeah, I know at my job, we've really had to get creative about how we provide services. Like kind of like with what Lisa's saying, I really do appreciate the face-to-face, and I feel like there's a lot to be said about like holding space and being present with another person. But now, because of what's going on, like with the health crisis and everything, like we have to really be creative. Like we're using the phone, but we're also using like apps and FaceTime and that type of stuff, but while keeping like clients' privacy and everything. And it's forcing us to be like, find new ways of meeting an end. And before, like, there's only like a couple ways of doing things, and now we're really having to think outside the box, and how do we support families and individuals in the best way possible within the confines of what's happening.
Yeah, and thank you, Kat, for bringing up the apps, because apps, it's definitely a new frontier for mental health. There's a lot of apps out there that are really helpful, even just for meditation, when we're talking about the Calm app or Headspace, things like that, that offer tools for us to practice, whether it's mindfulness or deep breathing, but also tools like BetterHelp, which is an online platform that offers therapy. So there's a lot out there. We also partner with a group called Cyber Guide, which is on our website as well. And it's basically mental health professionals rating apps so that you know which apps are actually helpful and recommended by mental health professionals. Because like Cynthia said, not everyone has access. So it's important, one, to find out what your resources are. Does your job offer mental health services? Can you ask for those? Or if you don't, to know that there are tools out there to help us cope with what's going on. And also mental health professionals are also turning to writing articles. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. Definitely something that's accessible for everyone. And YouTube videos, watching things that are helpful. There's a lot of therapists that also provide free YouTube videos, where they talk about anxiety or coping with things. So there are tools out there, that we can seek for now while we're more limited.
We have a question that just came in. How can Latinx tech professionals help the most vulnerable, particularly undocumented families who have been affected by the current climate, given that they will likely not receive direct financial assistance from the government? Before y'all get into that, I want to mention that here at Techqueria, we're working to address that particular problem. We're talking to partners right now about creating a crowdfunding campaign to help those very people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, that right there, right? There's people doing things out there, they're connecting, people are doing things collectively. This is something that's, that's big, and it's happening right now, and it's unjust. And with situations like this, we're seeing just how unfair and how much injustice there is, not just in the US, but in the world, when it comes to supporting people of color or most vulnerable populations. So I think it's really important for us to look for those resources, like even through Techqueria, through other organizations, right, that we can support. There's obviously going to be some limits right now with us being able to physically do a lot of things because of keeping each other safe, but we can also reach out to people that we know are struggling. I think we all know coworkers or friends or family members who are in that situation, right? And a lot of times we think that talking or even checking in might not be as helpful because we're not doing something, but it really makes a huge difference for people to know that we're thinking about them, for people to know that we care about them, that they're on our mind, and that, we're giving them space as well to be able to express that frustration. So there's a few things I think that people can do like that, whether it's contributing to people who are organizing, whether it's being informed and learning about what is happening, and also like taking care of ourselves and taking care of our loved ones that are going through that experience.
And as a follow-on to that, we just got another question come in that it's, how do you focus your energy and your time in terms of helping others? I mean, I know for myself, like I've always had this problem in the past of like wanting to help everyone and then realizing I get stretched too thin, and then I'm not helping anybody. So on like on a personal front, I've like, I have a lot more focus now. And for me, that was the process of like realizing like what is really important for me and the thing I can commit to.
Yeah, yeah. And
Thank
Cynthia,
you for sharing that. I think for me, in my experience doing this work, I've definitely experienced burnout, and it's actually something very, very common in doing this work. And I'm sure in any other work, right? When you're constantly feeling stressed, you know, your body tells you, right? Your body gives you messages like you're feeling tired, that you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed and anxious. And then when all of that accumulates, then this is how burnout happens, right? You feeling a lot of compassion fatigue and a lot of tiredness. And for me, that has been my experience. And I think I realized when I feel like I overextend myself, well, first of all, I always try to check in with myself, right? What is it that is in my capacity to do to help, you know, others right now? What is it that I need to do to take care of myself first, right? I think first and foremost, taking care of our needs, that our needs are met, and then, you know, and then checking in, like, is this something that is in my capacity and my time? Like, this is where boundaries come in, right? Setting those boundaries and limits. I know that we want to help everyone that we love. We want to be there and support them, but also, is that going to impact our own mental health? Is that going to impact, it's all about keeping a balance, right? Maintaining that balance, like finding ways to support ourselves, physical, emotional, spiritual, like wellness, and then, you know, checking in, how much can I do for others at this moment? Or if I can't do this much, like set your expectations, right? What is it that you can do? How much can you do? And you know, even doing a call or, you know, given right now, I've heard a lot of people supporting others, right, that are undocumented, like buying them, checking in with their friends, right? Like, what is it that they need? What can they provide? They're going to the grocery store, what can they buy, right? So these are ways that if you can provide that support, why not, right? But also checking in with yourself and what is your capacity. It's the first thing.
Yeah, Cynthia, you know, as you're speaking, I think about a metaphor, right? I think about, you know, for all of us who have been
Sorry, can you speak up? I'm having a hard time hearing.
Hear me now? Hold on.
Yeah, we can hear you, Liz.
Okay. So I think about a metaphor, right? Like, for example, for those of us that have been in an airplane and the stewardess is going over all the rules, right? And then the point where they talk about, you know, if we don't have air or there's very little air, the mask is gonna fall, right? Or it falls. And what do they always say? If you're with somebody that needs support, make sure you put it on yourself first before you support somebody else, because you're not going to be any good to nobody, you know, if you're not taking care of yourself first. Once you're able to take care of yourself, then you can help others. Give from your
We can't hear you, Liz. Sorry, I don't know.
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. What's the last part you heard?
To take care of yourself first.
Because you won't be good for anyone else if you're not.
Right. So you want to give from a cup that's like overflowing, right? You don't want to give from an empty cup, because burnout is not fun, you know. So you really have to check in with yourself. And like Cynthia was saying, like, what is my capacity? You know, what can I give right now? Check in with yourself the following day. Maybe it'll be different. But a lot of it, you know, I think a woman of color tend to give so much, and speaking from my own personal experience. And then, I mean, at the end of the day, there's no use if I feel exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of like what everyone is saying, like, it's okay to start small. Like, you don't have to have a solution, you know, and sometimes that could be just calling, like, you know, the people that are vulnerable, or running to the grocery store for someone, or even just like holding space with someone and just being present. You know, starting with little things with individuals in your circle and in your community can really help.
Yeah, and remember that you're human. We're all human. You know, we have limits. We're not superhuman, right? We can't save everyone. We can't solve every problem. And, you know, I think a lot of us who hold that value of being helpers and who instinctively care for others, we tend to overextend ourselves, and we tend to really forget that we're also part of, you know, everyone else. Like, we're people. We also need to take breaks. We also need to be able to say no. And so, you know, I always tell people, you need to practice saying no. And when we say no, it sounds like such a bad, like dirty word, like saying no. But the truth is that no, it is really us protecting ourselves and making sure that we're setting a limit. And there's nothing wrong with us setting a limit and taking care of ourselves. Like Liz said, if we don't take care of ourselves, and what good can we do for others if we, you know, if we're tired, if we're angry, if we're putting our own problems to the side and not focusing on what we need to do. You know, and I think also that's something in Latino culture that a lot of us get from our families, because we are very collective, and there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, there's always pros and cons to everything. But when we're talking about being collective in families, you know, it's a very big survival strategy, right? We do it to survive. Like, we help one another, we help elevate each other. But at the same time, we also have to realize that we're not responsible for everyone, that people are also resourceful, that people are also strong. And if we see them as, you know, incapable, then we're also not giving them an opportunity, you know, to solve their own problems. So I think being able to be mindful of that and being okay with saying no, and that includes the working from home, right? If you're at home and, you know, maybe family thinks, oh, well, they're home, so they must not really be working, and you're being asked to do a million things, it's okay for you to say, you know what, I'm actually working, so no, I can't do that. I can't pick up your cousin in, like, you know, East Oakland right now, or I can't go to, like, the grocery store and get the, you know, your favorite cereal right now, or, you know, no, I can't take care of your cat right now. You know, it's okay to say those things that, you know, I think that we've kind of come from a place where it's a lot of guilt and shame, a lot of internalized, you know, messages that we get from being able to advocate for ourselves. But, you know, part of breaking cycles is being able to reestablish, and also to really come to terms with, you know, what are things that I can do to change the way that, you know, that I function in not just my family, but at work, because these are things that are going to help us outside of family and relationships, right? At work, we have to do the same thing. There are people who are going to try to take advantage of us, and we need to know how to say no. We need to set limits. We need to be able to advocate for ourselves. So I think that that's another thing. It's all about how we're framing it, right? If we're framing it from the perspective of, I'm a bad person because I say no, well, you're going to feel bad. But if you're framing it from the perspective of, I'm a human and I have needs, and I also deserve to be loved and cared for, and, you know, to be able to have the same opportunities, then you're most likely going to see it in a more empowering kind of perspective and way.
Yeah, and I think this comes back, just really briefly, this really comes back to this, you know, this cis hetero patriarchy, right? Because even within our culture, women are, you know, if we say no, if we don't tend to the children, if we don't tend to men, then, you know, we're selfish, right? And I think it's so internalized. It's like, it's so internalized even within women, for women and men, right? And I think that's part of the cultural component where we really have to develop the self-awareness and self-compassion and understanding that these are all very rooted cultural, you know, norms.
Can you touch on, especially for women of color, around working from home, that in a very like traditional type of home, women are expected to do more around the house, but now you're also like working, right?
Yeah, that's definitely very hard to see. I mean, I personally don't have children, but I know that I think about my mom, because she is someone who is always tends to my dad and my siblings and my niece, right? Who's a kinship, who's providing care for for grandchildren, right? And it's very challenging for me as someone who's not very traditional, who defies sort of these things, who comes from a very compassionate, understanding way. I feel like before I used to be very resentful and had so much anger. Like I was like, oh, I can't stand the, machismo, and because I grew up with that. So it's like a lot of these are internalized, the messages that we grow up in, and it takes a lot of compassion. And for me, it has taken in my own journey, it has taken a lot of understanding and compassion, and knowing that some people are going to follow these strict, or just these gender norms and ways of tending to the family, and things that I've seen with families that I work with is that having to really support women of color and finding their voice and finding their truth, and being compassionate and understanding and checking in with themselves, like, what are my needs? What is it that I want and need right now? And how can I communicate this in a way that is not going to jeopardize my safety, right? That is not going to jeopardize my relationships. And I think, it really takes a lot of self-exploration and understanding, and coming in from a compassionate way.
Are there any practices that can help with cultivating compassion?
I would say to really practice mindfulness, really practice being with yourself in the moment, like tapping into and tuning into what you're experiencing in the moment, what you're feeling in the moment, right? I think oftentimes it's very challenging to do that because we're always on the go, on the grind. This culture, this capitalist culture, society always wanting us to do something. And then when we stop, we don't even know what to do with what we're feeling, with what we're experiencing. So it takes a lot of just taking deep breaths, like doing belly breaths, like tuning into how you're feeling in the moment, like asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? What do I need in this moment right now? Practicing validating your feelings, like I'm honoring what I'm feeling right now. I'm honoring what is happening in my body right now. And also practicing radical acceptance, like surrender. And surrender doesn't mean that you're gonna, give up. It means that allowing to feel what you're feeling in the moment and letting it go and letting it, transform to whatever happens next. I think that's what emotions are. Like mindfulness is allowing it to be, and everything transforms. So it'll transform to something else. And I think that's what mindfulness is coming to the present moment and practicing that radical acceptance. And that's what I have. I don't know if someone wants to add anything.
I know for me, oh, you
Go
can go,
ahead,
Liz.
Kat.
Oh, no, I was just going to say journaling can be really helpful as well. Like journaling can provide a space for you to really reflect on what you're feeling and also have an outlet to let it out and get it outside of your body. And also just finding ways to be creative, whether that's through movement or listening to music or drawing or coloring. I know for me, I have an adult coloring book that really helps. I think just finding ways to, just express yourself through the arts or through movement can be really helpful.
I agree. Creativity, reclaiming our creativity, right?
Yeah.
And tapping into our inner children, right? Sometimes, I think Lise and I, we were talking about, well, if you don't know what to do in the moment, do you remember what you liked when you were a child? Like, what did you like to do? Did you like to draw? Did you like to play? Like, tap into that. And don't be afraid. Like, it may feel weird and awkward, right? Like that you're just like, oh my God, am I really doing this? But I mean, nobody's watching. And if they are, just enjoy it.
Yeah. You know, along with what Cynthia's saying is like, what brings you joy ultimately, right?
Yeah.
What are those really thinking about when you were a child or even me now as an adult? Like for me, like I love to dance, so sometimes I'll just dance anywhere. I don't even care, you know. Yeah, what is it that brings you joy? And then also backtracking a little bit, as far as like those thoughts, you know, it's really paying attention to your thoughts. And then when you have that negative thought, like for example, like I just don't feel good enough, or I have that imposter syndrome, like acknowledge it, you know, acknowledge that to yourself, sit in it. And then also I kind of see it like as a tape recorder. You know, sometimes our thoughts go round and round and round and round, and it's like, oh wait, okay, this is how I'm feeling, acknowledge it, and then replace it with something positive, you know. So if I'm thinking like, oh, I'm such like an imposter, like I'm not feeling good enough, but okay, wait, Liz, okay, acknowledge it. And so now I could replace that with, you know, I have a lot of worth and I have a lot of value. And saying it out loud, even sitting in front of a mirror, looking at yourself in the eyes, you know, I know it kind of sounds cheesy, but it really does help, because with our unconscious, what we think or say, whether it's true or not, we're going to believe it. So that's why it's so important. It's like you're pulling out all these weeds in your mind. Like you don't want to have all these weeds, pull them out, and let's plant flowers. So those are some of the thoughts that come up for me.
Yeah, and I also wanted to just touch a little bit on the whole gender roles and gender norms thing, you know, for men of color as well, that we also, you know, we also have a lot of expectations and assumptions, right, about the way that we deal with our problems as well. And a lot of that is having to hold on to emotions, being strong, you know, not complaining, not asking for help. And, you know, we take these things as value, right? And we see them as an indication of masculinity. And so I think it's important to also challenge that, because the truth is that the most important relationship you're ever going to have is with yourself. And so being able to really explore that and understand that there is strength and vulnerability, not just in looking tough or even looking like, you know, nothing's hurting you or it doesn't bother you. You know, there's a lot more power in being vulnerable and also being able to have those conversations. And we are seeing a shift in that, for sure. You know, but I think for men of color, it's definitely something that also, you know, brings about a lot of trauma and a lot of avoidance, and you know, it can lead to so many things. I mean, there's a lot of substance abuse. There's a lot of use of, you know, maladaptive coping strategies, because we don't know how to handle those feelings or express them. So it's really important to understand that this is a relationship with yourself, and you know, go from there. And like everyone else was saying, to really value yourself and really understand that we are human at you know, bottom line, regardless of gender, that we are people, and we all will deal with very difficult situations. We all will go through struggles. We all will go through pain and loss, and that's part of being human, more so than being men or women. So understanding that and really establishing that relationship with yourself, because at the end of the day, you know, who else can we depend on but ourselves, right? I mean, and I don't mean that in the sense of like we don't have other people, but I mean it in the sense of like we have control of ourselves. You know, we need to develop healthy relationships with ourselves so that we can develop healthy relationships with other people, and also grow, right? Grow together with others, but grow within ourselves. And that's all part of talking about mindfulness, talking about sitting with our feelings, talking about being vulnerable, you know, doing the work. You know, for me, it's been years. I go to therapy as a therapist. I mean, and it's been amazing. It's helped me in so many different ways, but it's also been other experiences, right? Being open with my partner, being open with friends, you know, being able to be more direct with my parents, you know, with my siblings, even calling my brother who is, you know, very much a man's man, and, you know, asking him like, how are you doing, and giving him space to just share with me, because I know he trusts me, you know, and I know that he doesn't always have that outlet, you know, and so I know I've seen a difference between him and his children, just in those interactions, you know. So I think shifting those cycles and really challenging all the gender stuff, gender norm, role, whatever, you know, it's a journey, and I think that's going to lead to better relationships with ourselves and others.
Thanks. I especially liked how you phrased it about how there's a lot of power and vulnerability. Like that does take a lot of strength, and it takes more strength to do that than to like cover it up or avoid it.
Yeah, because being vulnerable means being it's almost like thinking about being naked, right? That you're exposed. And it's scary. It's not something, I mean, we don't all want to just be like, okay, I'm going to expose myself. And, you know, there's a fear there. It's very powerful, right? And so when we're talking about vulnerability, it does take a lot of mental energy, a lot of physical energy versus pushing something down or minimizing it, right? Because you're not really doing anything besides pretending like it's not real, right? But when we do, and we have to sit with the feeling, you know, it takes practice, and a lot of us have a hard time, and it is part of the journey, right? It is part of us continuously reestablishing our relationship with ourselves, and also understanding that vulnerability isn't about, you know, letting people see a weakness. It's about letting people know that, you know, we are human, and that we all have these experiences, right? Like even loss. Like I've known people who lose people that are close to them, and they can't cry because they feel like, I can't show people that I'm sad, and so they're there for others, but they never process. And then you see these things come up later on, you know, and this is just one situation. I mean, there's so many different situations where, you know, we try to be strong for other people, but at the same time, most of these people, they want to know that others are with them, that they're also feeling the same way, right? Because, you know, it's like masking something. So I think that's why when I talk about vulnerability, it's really about just letting people know that, you know, they're not alone, even with this situation, you know, with everything that's going on with the coronavirus and people being scared. You know, I've seen people who go, like I said, to the one extreme of denial and, oh, this is not true, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, it becomes something where we really are scared inside, but we're just trying to tell ourselves like, this isn't real. And so it just, you know, it manifests itself in its own way. So I think being able to tell people like, hey, you know, I'm also scared, you know, I'm worried, when someone shares that with us, it's more powerful than us telling someone like, oh, well, you know, kind of brushing it off like it's not real, right?
Yeah, I think you really hit on something there, because I've been seeing that a lot, about a lot of people in denial, and also people who are trying to put on a like a positive front, because they don't want others to sort of be put into a, you know, a place of like worry.
Yeah, and I'm at least from my own perspective in terms of mental health and the way I work with my patients, I don't like the positive negative thing. I think that it's very black and white. I'm all about like things being a balance, right? Like it's not about like making something positive, because sometimes it's not positive, but sometimes it's also not negative, right? And we tend to make these assumptions about things, whether it's like, well, it's either this or it's that, and there's no in between, and we limit ourselves. And, you know, we also create so much like anxiety for ourselves, because it's either I'm gonna die or I'm gonna survive. Whereas it's also can be like, well, what can I do to make sure that I'm keeping other people safe and myself safe, rather than jumping from one extreme to the other. You know, so I think that that's very important when we're looking at things. It's about being realistic, right? That not everything will be positive, not everything will be negative. Yes, it's about how we're also framing things and how we're perceiving them. That's going to make a big difference. But if we're at least realistic with the sense of like, you know, right now we know that we have better chances of keeping each other safe by doing what we're doing. That's not a positive, it's not a negative, it's just something that we know, and so we're doing it. And yes, it comes with all these things that are pros and cons. But we also, like I said, there's going to be stuff we can't control it on. There's going to be the stuff that we do. And so how do we really focus on the things that we can control, and not feel like we're so at a loss, right? Because I think that makes a big difference for people. And a lot of times we learn to, like I said, we learned all of these ways of coping, minimizing, putting it down, because it makes us feel better, or at least it makes us feel like safe, right? But the reality is that a lot of times it's like a pseudo kind of approach, right? Where we're doing it to soothe, but we're avoiding the situation, right? Or we're not really taking care of ourselves. You know, I've seen people who are like, well, you know, they said it's only affecting these people, so I'm going to go outside and, you know, do what I do. And then it's like, yeah, you're right. But at the same time, there's also a responsibility for us to know that, you know, there are people that are being affected by this, and it is a lot bigger than that. And, you know, we have to be mindful of that too. And we don't even know that, right? We're just hearing that. Like, we don't know. That's the thing. When we don't know something, we just make all these assumptions and we panic, you know, so we're going to do things that are not always as rational. So I think it's all about finding things that we have control over, and you know, just seeing things for what they are, and making sure that we're being responsible for ourselves and others.
Well, we're pretty late into the meeting, so I guess maybe I wanted to know if we had any like closing thoughts, like maybe, you know, maybe what are some like positive developments that you're seeing, like around anything.
I think for me, just with everything that's going on, I was telling my mom this the other day. I think I take a lot of reassurance in that, like, we're not in this alone. Like, we have some of the best minds, like, in the world that are working to try to figure out a solution. And I think it also gives me reassurance that I'm not alone in this, and that, like, everyone else is kind of experiencing many of the same things that I'm feeling. And even though those feelings are uncomfortable and they can be scary, it's reassuring that, you know, I'm not alone in this, and that I can seek support from other people, because most likely they're experiencing a lot of the same things.
I think something for me is just know that, just like what Kat was saying, we're not alone in this. This is a collective experience, and know that your feelings are valid. Our feelings are valid, and let's honor those, and let's stay connected. And, you know, we have so many, you know, there's so much to be grateful for, right? I think practicing gratitude and know that, you know, that there's a lot to be grateful, and know that we also have we have many medicines, right? I think this is an invitation for us to really tap into those and tap into our own healing, right? Tap into what is it that, you know, that we need to heal, and individually and collectively, and tap into those, right? Tap into our creativity, and into our own healing journey, and also know that we have knowledge, wisdom, strength, and that is always with us, right? And I think that is that's essential for our own, you know, spirits, our own spiritual, you know, emotional, physical, psychological well-being.
What comes up with for me is the ability to really be able to slow down. And that's hard, because once you slow down and you're not being a busy bee, you know, all these feelings start to come up that maybe you've been suppressing or not acknowledging, or maybe kind of acknowledge it, sort of, kind of, but not really, you know. And for me, you know, my anxiety has really kicked in. So I really have to sit with that, and it's not easy, you know, but I think it's important to like also befriend these feelings, because that's what they are, their feelings and their emotions, right? And not let them overwhelm you or overtake you, you know. And asking myself is like, what do I value? What do I value? What's important to me? I really see this as a time also of, you know, introspection. What brings me joy? You know, what feeds my spirit? You know, I think those are really important questions to ask ourselves, you know, because those things will keep us grounded. And like, you know, remember to connect with yourself, and then connect with others as well too.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, for people to go easy on yourself. You know, I know there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of question marks, but we can't solve things in one day, and things take time, and it's a process. And as much as we want to feel like everything is resolved, you know, and I know that's part of us feeling safe. We also have to be mindful of, you know, how much strain we're putting on ourselves, right? If we're not sleeping, if we're not eating, if we're not setting those limits, if we're not taking care of ourselves, you know, we're going to have a harder time trying to navigate through all of these problems, because then we're just adding more onto our plate, right? So it's really about taking care of yourself, really having that internal dialogue of what is it that you need, and realizing that, you know, all of these things that are happening right now, like, we can't solve them. You know, we're not going to fix things right away. Like Kat said, there's a lot of people out there who are trying to, you know, get us to safety. You know, we're all in this together. We're all being mindful of staying in. You know, I mean, it's just one of those things where we need to be patient. We need to be patient with ourselves, and we need to be sure that we are taking control of the things that we can. And like I said, that includes the way that we're treating ourselves, and also, you know, how we're staying connected. And, you know, we shared about a lot of different resources out there in terms of, you know, spaces or places that you can go to, or even access apps or mental health things to help yourself. And it's okay to not be okay right now. This is something that is very, you know, like I said, unprecedented. And the only way we're going to get through this is together, but also taking care of ourselves and making sure that we are, you know, doing what we have to do in our daily routines, you know, whether it's working from home. You know, there's a lot of people out there who don't have that privilege, who are still out there, who are still fighting and making sure that people are safe. And we need to also practice that gratitude, right, for the opportunities that we have, and you know, think about the things that are good, the things that do bring balance to our lives. Yeah, and just be empathetic with yourself.
Well, thank you so much. And I mean, I want to express gratitude to you all for taking the time to share this wisdom with us, and this healing. I think it's really needed, and I think this has been helping a lot of people. So I appreciate like all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we appreciate what you are all
Good.
doing
Yes.
as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for organizing this and for inviting us to be a part of it. You know, like I said, our website, you know, we do offer resources on there as well, and there's a lot of articles that I'm sharing. So if you go to our website at psychosocial.media and go under resources, there is a specific page for, you know, coping with anxiety and stress with the whole COVID-19 situation. You know, and like I said, just continuing to do these things. I mean, this is what's going to help us get through it, right? Being able to provide these spaces and letting people know that, you know, we're all going through something very difficult in our own way, and you know, that's the way we're going to get through it.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.